and I will send slides out to all attendees. So again, we're really happy to have Andrea Schneider here. She is from MIT, Solve, and she is the Communications and Marketing Director. And so Andrea is involved and responsible for all external communications for Solve, but she also works with the Solve teams. So the Solve teams are very similar to our Be Changemaker teams. They're trying to solve global issues, and Solve tries to connect them to resources to help them do that. And so Andrea works with those teams to get them prepared for their pitches, as well as being in front of media. So she's an excellent resource to have with us today to help you learn more about pitches. Andrea has 12 years experience in nonprofits, corporate, and consumer sectors, and really has worked a lot in PR, communications, and working with entrepreneurs. So Andrea, take it away.
Thank you so much, Debbie and Grace, and hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or evening, depending where you are. It sounds like we have a very global group assembled today, and it's wonderful to see. So as Debbie mentioned, I am Andrea Schneider, and I lead communications and marketing for MIT Solve. Solve is a social impact marketplace. We issue 4 challenges to social entrepreneurs like yourselves every year. We then go on to connect our selected solver teams with the resources they need to scale their impact and solve these challenges. So in essence, everything we do at Solve is about telling a story. It's about really differentiating your solution, the solver solution, to a variety of different audiences. So with that, I am thrilled to be here today to talk about the perfect pitch. And definitely welcome questions, as Debbie mentioned, at the end of the presentation. So I understand that everyone on the line is in some way solving a big thorny issue. And with pitch competitions coming up, this is hopefully a great time for you to learn a little bit more about what investors, customers, and the media find compelling in a business pitch. So we can jump into it, and let's get started. So on slide 3, we are talking about sort of the basics of pitching. And Debbie, thank you for kind of moving the slides along. So as I mentioned at Solve, we review more than 1,000 business pitches every year from 100 countries. So we've seen plenty of great and promising solutions that just need a little bit of help and refinement to live up to their potential. And regardless of what background you are, what country you're based in, or who you're actually pitching, the most important thing to start with when pitching your business is stating the problem. You really want to focus on the market opportunity. And based on the variety of different startups I've heard about and seen in the comments coming in and the questions, statistics and data can really help, especially when your problem that you're tackling is very tricky, something like water scarcity and quality that I heard earlier. You really want to make your pitch clear, understandable, and ultimately prepare for questions and answers with the judges after your pitch. So, going into it, you need to convince people of something. You need to really grab their hearts and their minds and bring them along with the journey. So, people call it an elevator pitch, and I've already heard a question about that, because you should be able to pitch it in the time it takes to ride in an elevator. But in this case, we allow for about 2 to 3, maybe a little bit more, about 3 minutes. The attention span now is really that of a short viral video. People don't have that much time to hear about your solution. So you need to make it concise, you need to make it clear, and you need to start with a market opportunity. So what's missing? Here's where you can tell a really compelling narrative about the problem and therefore your solution. So what specific issue does your solution address? And here's where you can get very specific about your key differentiators. So as I mentioned, statistics are a great thing to weave in here at the beginning with your market opportunity. And I think it was Nikita who has a mental health startup, which actually sounds somewhat similar to some of our brain health solver teams here at Solve. One of our solvers is called Tomo. And at the beginning of Tomo's pitch, the company really told the story of how globally more than 300 million people struggle with depression. Tomo increases access to mental health treatment by providing personalized mental health support. The app automates the iterative process of behavioral activation therapy to motivate users to adopt healthy habits. Some of the statistics, in addition to this 300 million people piece that they have woven in, is 1 in 5 people globally experience serious depression in their lives, and more than 75% of people who meet the criteria for depression go untreated. These statistics provide the need for a solution like Tomo. What needs to change in order to improve your issue? How can your product or solution do that? And this is where you really come in with stating the solution. So you've set the stage. 300 million people globally suffer from depression. Here's how my solution is going to trigger the change that our society needs. And ahead of this presentation, Debbie let me know that someone asked about demos. And that's a really, really important piece here. When you state your solution, any visual you have, any proof you have, anything tangible like a demo really, really helps to make your case. And one little sort of tactical tip is, be sure to check with event organizers ahead of time in order to sync up with them about PowerPoints, displays, any criteria that might be needed for your demo. And again, make it really quick. There are some high-tech demos that can be fairly dull, but anything you can do to liven it up with visuals and with video, and again, with stories, is really going to help make your case. So, you're stating the solution, and you need to also state why you're uniquely positioned to solve it. And I would say 2 of the most critical items in making your case and why you're uniquely positioned to solve this big challenge is a business plan and a team in place. So likely most of the people on this call are co-founders or founders, CEOs. Putting yourself out there is a really big piece of this, which is why we'll definitely get to, some press pitching as part of this. Anyone who's putting themselves out there not only needs to find investors, but they need to drum up business attention and momentum. So a business plan is a big piece of that. And that's your deck, and we'll absolutely get into some more detail there. So stating why you're uniquely positioned to solve this problem is really bolstered by stories. Tell a story. Tell a story of your key beneficiaries, customers, anyone in your orbit who's impacted by your solution. Examples at Solve that really have resonated with me include actually a 14-year-old solver, if you can believe it. Her name is Emma Yang. She's from New York City. And as a freshman in high school, she has launched an app that helps empower patients of Alzheimer's. And the story that Emma tells, whether she's at a conference, pitching a judge at a competition, or on the phone or in front of a camera with a reporter, is all about the story of her grandmother. Emma's grandmother suffered from Alzheimer's, and it inspired Emma to launch the app in order to remind her grandmother who she was, music her grandmother loved as a young girl, anything to really trigger memories and to help put context around the loved ones in her life. And I'm very pleased to say, as a supporter of Emma's and of Timeless, that the app is going live this summer, and she continues to get great sources of funding. It also helped that she was tweeted by Bill Gates. So she's really getting a lot of great momentum. And I think in large part because Emma has harnessed the power of this personal story. So if you can tell how your solution has really impacted anyone's life, whether it's a family member or a friend of yours, or one of your customers, or anyone whose life has been touched by your product, it really behooves you to tell that early and often in why you're stating why you are uniquely positioned to solve this problem. Another item that I know has been on everyone's mind, and certainly some of the questions rolling in will tell that story, is around financial and product details. So when you're talking about, why you're uniquely positioned to solve the problem, it's important to note that what matters is different if your startup is a for-profit or a not-for-profit. And it sounds like we have a healthy mix of the two, although I look forward to hearing from you all after the presentation. But, what industry you're from, what vertical your business is in really will dictate sort of how much financial information you want to provide upfront in your deck. It's not necessarily important for your pitch, for that 2 to 3 minute pitch, and it could certainly be an addendum. And to get very tactical with you guys, I would say, if you have a 20 slide deck, you have 20 different slides in your PowerPoint, reserve about 1 or 2 dedicated to financials. You really do not want to bog down the judges and the audience with, a variety of different numbers and figures when you could really put a lot of that as an addendum in the back of your deck. But there are very important pieces that, regardless of your industry, you're going to want to include. Things like annual budget, expected sources of revenue, customer acquisition costs. How much does it cost your business to acquire a customer? Whether it's marketing, whether it's Salesforce, whoever it is, you need to really get that aligned. And amount of budget that you've secured to date and key hurdles that you foresee in the future. Another important piece particularly for investors in your pitch, is when will you hit cash flow break even? In other words, when will your expenses be in line with your revenue? And do you have growth of revenue? Year over year, are you making more revenue? In other words, how long will it take to scale your business? I heard somebody ask, how much should I offer up to investors? What's the right mix in terms of equity? I can't answer that as a wholesale, one size fits all for everyone on the line. But what I will say is, from my experience, whether it was at Axion, where we lent microfinance loans to small businesses, social entrepreneurs, or here at MIT Solve, where we're basically finding and supporting social entrepreneurs who are solving key challenges, is, don't get too greedy holding on to equity. If you find the right partners, a smaller percentage of a bigger company is worth more than a bigger percentage of absolutely nothing. So that's important advice that I've heard along the way from investors, and something for you all to keep in mind. So after you have stated why you're uniquely positioned to solve the problem, you want to close the loop. You want to remind the audience that the impact your solution is having on the stated problem is going to truly be transformative. So I hope this is all making sense so far. Debbie, feel free to go to the next slide. So here we talk about to pitch or not to pitch, when to make an ask. And this is where I'm going to go more into my comfort zone and certainly, encourage myriad questions at the end, because the bulk of my experience has been really working with external audiences, whether that's the general public or media. And media is really a tool to get to various audiences, whether you're trying to reach investors, academics like MIT, potential future customers. The media is a huge and important and valuable tool for entrepreneurs to leverage. So this is more about the press aspect of pitching your business. And press coverage can be a big boost to a startup organization, and it can help attract funding. So, while we don't all have access to pricey PR agencies or public relations consultants and fancy, people who can show you the ropes, I really hope that you can take away from this some important tips when it comes to seeing your organization in the news, whether that's social media or traditional media. So first and foremost, think about the objectives. Think about, what is the ultimate business goal of this interview, and how do I convey my brand? So, many of you, I'm sure, have had some opportunity to interact with reporters or influencers in some way. And even if you haven't, it's something to think about for the future. As you build your business and think about all of the things that we've discussed so far in terms of, how you're uniquely positioned to solve this problem, what your company's key differentiators are, you're really going to want to write down 3 or 4 key messages to deliver during the interview. And you want to come up with specific ways to deliver each one. And that could be something as simple as writing down a sentence for each and every key message. In addition to the proactive pieces, you want to anticipate difficult topics and questions that you may be asked by the reporter and think about how you can handle them. Really get ahead of those curveball questions, which are things that maybe, you're not as proud of about your company. Maybe it's your weak spot. Maybe you're not attracting enough customers, or there's some sort of hole that a reporter could poke. Be sure to be honest with yourself and kind of address that internally before you talk to anyone externally. So packaging news is a really, really great way to reach out to reporters. And, we all see press releases. I would say that's kind of going by way of dinosaurs. Press releases and sort of formal corporate news is important for some entities, but perhaps not as much for a startup. What's important is packaging your news in a way that feels really organic and true to your brand. So that could be a milestone or a moment. Perhaps it's a certain number of clients or customers that your company has reached. Perhaps it's key funding, hiring. Perhaps you recruited a fantastic board member. This deserves a write-up, a marketing piece. It could even be on Medium or social media of some sort, and you can use it wherever your audiences are. Again, for many of you who have social impact startups, Facebook and Twitter are really invaluable and they're free. So, it's a great way to actually target reporters who are writing about your vertical, your, area of expertise. And if you ever get to the point where you're pitching yourself or other experts on your staff, the simplest and best way to do that is to find reporters who are covering your industry and really draft up a brief way to summarize your company and the key issues that you can discuss with confidence and expertise. So working with the media and sort of shaping a quote unquote moment is tying your company's news to something topical and external to make it relevant. At MIT Solve, for example, one of our challenges this year is all around coastal communities. If there's something going on, whether it's a hurricane or other weather event, we're sure to insert ourselves as experts in the conversation. So obviously these are negative things that are happening. I heard in Hawaii, for example, there's going to be a Category 4 hurricane that's coming. And, I've been closely working with our head of sustainability, and he tells me that, there are fewer hurricanes right now on the Atlantic coast and many more on the Pacific coast because of El Nino. And so this is just invaluable insight. It's something that I could bullet out to a reporter who writes about climate change or, freak weather events, or simply is based in that region. And I could reach out to them and say, hey, here's what, my colleague has worked on in the past. Here's some bullets about how he can provide some insight to your readers or your audience. Let's set up a phone call. If you don't ask, you won't receive. And honestly, a big part of pitching yourself to press, to investors, is really being bold and audacious and not being afraid to put yourself out there. So, it's pretty easy to find people's emails, pretty easy to ping them on Twitter. Just put yourself out there and see if they're interested in talking with you. So in general, and my fourth point here is really understanding the process of PR and media relations. You really, as I say, want to find reporters who cover your business area, follow them, read their stories, build relationships with them, and try to become a trusted source. In general, reporters really find that data and new findings are useful. So if your organization is doing a study, if you have a big reveal, if you have some sort of a case study that you think would be interesting to the general public, really put some thought into a marketing piece and do your own PR. I mean, in this day and age, it's easier than ever to reach out and cut through the clutter and the noise. So with that, we can go on to the next slide. And here I really wanted to just walk you all through some very top line presentation tips, whether you're talking with a reporter or with an investor or with a potential customer, whoever it is, there are a lot of sort of quick tips in giving presentations effectively and getting your solution out there, your story out there. So first and foremost, I would say rehearsing is key. At Solve, we always say, role play with a friend or a colleague. Again, if you have access to a professional trainer, that's amazing, but likely you don't. But if budget allows, that's great. In addition, practice on your own with your own agenda in mind. I even rehearse in front of a mirror. It's important to actually say the words aloud. And I heard from Debbie that somebody had a question about slides and what people want to see on slides, a variety of audiences. Regardless of who you are in your background, simple is better. A lot of white space is important. Visuals to tell your company's story whenever possible. Keep the message uncluttered. And, in all of my experience giving media trainings, I would say for clothing, keep things simple. Avoid any pattern clothing. Keep jewelry to a minimum. You don't want to distract anyone while you're on stage. So when you're giving your business pitch, actually avoid white or black. That's going to help you depending on what the background's like. Avoid green as well. So wear colors that are not white, black, or green, or anything patterned. And, your style and overall appearance can really affect what you say and really influence the perception of your overall content. Take a moment to look in the mirror before you present. Take a moment to pull yourself together and really mentally feel like you're at the top of your game. Regardless of what stage you're on or who you're talking to, eye contact is very critical to credibility. And hand gestures actually work really well. So be confident, be aware of your facial expression, and smile. You speak slowly, and most importantly, relax. Forget that the camera's there, and feel free to take pauses. Silence is actually a really, really important tool to giving a dramatic presentation. It's okay to pause. And one thing we always say to anyone who's doing a filmed presentation is really to sit up straight. Try not to fidget, try not to swivel around. Focus on the conversation at hand. And for your energy, think sort of half caffeinated coffee. I know a lot of us are very dependent on caffeine to get the day started, but you really want to have that right balance of energy and enthusiasm. And again, like we were saying at the beginning of the presentation, be concise, know your audience, and simplicity, never go out of style. It's the best way. And it's okay to be a little bit nervous as long as those nerves kind of turn into positive energy. So one piece here that I wanted to also address is sort of how to prepare for questions and answers from the judges. I've heard that many of you are preparing for that presentation that will ultimately lead to what we call a Q&A. And there's a lot of basic sort of mental prep that you can do. As I mentioned, 2 to 3 minutes is sort of the key amount of time for presentations about your business. No rambling, be concise. Prepare for any questions and answers with the judges by talking aloud. Prep a list of questions that an audience or the judges might ask you. Again, this takes a lot of self-reflection about your company and about some of the weaknesses that people might foresee and pick apart. These questions that you might be asked could be around scale and timing, impact, social impact or otherwise, customer acquisition, or the biggest challenge that you might face. It's important to prep answers to those questions, even if they're one line. So in general, the mental energy is a really important piece of all this. You want to be positive, confident, calm, and energetic. Your passion will show. And always have an answer, even if the answer is, I don't know. Some of you might have questions for me that I simply won't know because they'll be maybe too technical or too financial. But I'd be happy to share my email in case I need to confer with colleagues here at Solve. And I think that's an important thing to note. We don't all have the answers all the time, but if you present the information that you do have and you stay calm and stay collected, you can always get back to the judges at a later date. And you can always get back to them with a question if you'd benefit from their knowledge. say, I'm going to answer your question with a question of my own. And let me get back to you on this because I don't know right now. So, we've covered a lot of ground here. I think now it would be great to ask all of you if you have any specific questions, and we can delve into some more topics in detail.
Thank you so much, Andrea. We actually have some questions for your wonderfully delivered presentation. Thank you again. So one question we have right now that I can see is from Matilda. And she asked about how honest should we be in terms of talking with the press and the reporters, and would it hurt our company when we become too honest? When they ask about difficult times or the challenges, what are you struggling with at the moment?
That is such a good question. Thank you for that. And I would say when it comes to the press, you do want to be very careful. This is important in terms of financials, in terms of information that perhaps gives away too much to your competitors. So think long and hard before you put together your bulleted list of talking points. And when in doubt, I would say for the challenges, it's best to rely on stories. So, you could talk about sort of the struggles of entrepreneurship in general. And I've heard many interviews successfully conveyed that way. It's the kind of thing where you're living and breathing your passion, and any reporter I think would find that really compelling. And when I say stories, really talk about the customer, talk about the ultimate beneficiary. If we're talking water scarcity, insert a story about a family that couldn't access clean water and what your technology would actually do to help mitigate that problem or get ahead of it. If we're talking about the mental health app or other mental health related product, talk about somebody who is sick and, what exactly your app would do to get ahead of that. I would say don't forge, what you think might be press-worthy answers or information just in an effort to get a headline, because ultimately it could hurt your business. So better to err on the side of caution, particularly with reporters.
That's very good. But that leads to the next question too. So how honest should you be with your investors when they question about, how successful you have been in the past?
Yeah, I would say investors are a little bit different. And again, they're going to be laser focused on the revenue and revenue growth questions. And even if you don't have a past track record, having a really sound business plan for the future and how you plan to acquire new customers is key. So you can be a little more forward looking here. With reporters, however, you don't want to be too predictive, because that could lead to just a negative headline. It could lead to some other issues with investors. I would say in general, investors, co-investors, partners get very sensitive with media. As many of you probably have experience with, just getting a press release approved and getting kind of input from a variety of stakeholders can be quite a tedious process. And there's a reason for that. With the press, it could backfire and always trail you around. With investors, I would say you need to really provide those key stats for your past performance and indicators for the future. So focus on what you're going to be doing with your team in the future and how you can rebound from some of those perhaps negative issues that you faced in the past.
Mm-hmm. That sounds very good. So still around the topic with investors, one question from the audience is, how do we decide on the amount of money that they should ask for?
Well, I think that's really around your particular business. What are your business goals? What do you need? And then I think you can be quite bold. As long as you have a way to make up that revenue and continue to grow year over year, there should be no reason why that's, holding you back. I would say a competitive analysis is quite helpful here. Talking to peers in your industry. I know at Solve, a lot of our solvers tend to collaborate with each other, because if you have a water related startup, talking to somebody who's been there and done that can shed some light on what your costs might be. Again, your customer acquisition costs, marketing, legal. What are all the bills that are going to add up, and what kind of funding do you need in order to get that kind of break even, revenue and cost prediction that you need. So it's really a case by case basis, but collaborating with your peers and working with people in your industry and networking can go such a long way. And these types of incubator programs that, like the one we're talking about right now, Be Changemaker and Solve, are important communities for that. And I would say talking with each other is a critical way to understand exactly what your costs might be, but also, frankly, asking the questions from the investors.
That's very good tip. So I think there's a really good comment about a pitch may not always be for raising funds, and sometimes could be looking for technical expertise. So how do we differentiate the pitch, or how can we reach out to the other person?
Just to clarify, a technical expertise as in recruitment or consulting?
I would assume this is for consulting in particular business, I suppose.
Okay, sure. Honestly, I've had such amazing luck, and I know a lot of the solvers that I've worked with and other entrepreneurs have had luck with cold calls. And by that, I mean even a message directly on LinkedIn. So when it comes to adapting your pitch and differentiating, it's really about how much information does this person need? When I talk about Solve, a lot of the time I give just one sentence. Solve is a marketplace for social impact. Only then do I go into more detail about the challenges we issue every year. And I know the same is true for a lot of our solvers. If you're looking for technical expertise, obviously you want to go into more detail about the tech and the sort of whatever powers your product or your solution. But you don't want to give away too much. So less is more. Entice people in. Offer to share more information if you need to, but try to follow that 22 rule. If you have a 20-page deck, only include 2 pages on financials. You can always have an addendum at the end. You can always share more information, but a quick email goes a much longer way. And I can tell you that from personal experience with our open rates, with Solve's marketing emails. A very, very quick email that highlights other people in our community goes such a long way versus a rambling email about something that isn't relevant to the majority of people. So think about segmenting your audience. If you're emailing a potential customer, obviously that's going to be a lot different from somebody who is a colleague or someone with technical expertise. So flattery also goes a long way here. I have to say, ask and you shall receive. People love to be asked for their advice. Whenever we're looking for a new advisor at MIT Solve, whenever we're looking for somebody who could perhaps be on our challenge leadership group, we're sure to do our homework. We really want to make that person feel like we're tailoring this especially for them. And I do that with reporters as well. Sometimes I'll even say, I read this article and you brilliantly described X, Y, and Z issue. Here's somebody who I think could help bolster your future articles. Make people feel good and reach for the stars. And that sort of goes back to the other question about funding and what's appropriate. You want to be bold, but also do your homework.
That's very good. And just additional comment from the question too, that was in terms of technical expertise from one of our teams from Be Changemaker looking at the issue of water purification. So they're just wondering that they would like to get a lot more information on the technical challenges more than the kind of fund that they can raise for their business. But I think you've answered it very well in terms of targeting the right people and making sure that you customize your pitch for the particular person that you're talking to or pitching to.
That's right. Yeah. And I would absolutely lean on academic resources here. And people in such a niche field tend to be very passionate. Having a lot of water experts on staff here, I can tell you that.
Okay. One other question I have, or actually there are several. So how do people sort of expand or understand a bit more regarding the engagement with potential investor? Question is, right now, a business now at the research stage where they need to understand the different stakeholders that their business will engage, but they also face challenges with getting funds to do the research. So that was the question about how do they go about, forming that engagement with potential investor.
Well, I think this is where peer review and peer collaboration would really benefit such a sort of early growth stage organization. I would approach a company that might be considered a competitor and see where they started. I would, again, follow sort of the formula detailed in the earlier slide about putting together your original pitch. And it might be a little bit premature, but reaching out to investors, a big piece of that is just getting clarity around your message, why you're suited to address this problem, and what's the market opportunity. And it's going to take several cold calls. It's going to take several rounds of getting rejected and kind of building up a thicker skin. But you'll get in the door. It just will take some time. And I think going to anyone who's been successful in your field and honestly asking them, how did you break through the noise, will be useful. Investors can be very, tricky to track down, but I think once you gain that momentum and realize how you need to make that last tweak to tell your story, which financials you actually need to achieve your goals and, break even with your revenue and expenses, that will be the moment, but there's no one size fits all. So I'm afraid I don't know if I have too much more to add on that.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you. Another question is about if a business has only one founder, do you see this could potentially be a problem for most investors when it comes to pitching?
I don't. I think, it's useful to have a co-founder for myriad reasons. Entrepreneurs I've talked to say everything from, mentally being in it together to really being that tag team sales duo. However, we have so many solvers who are on their own in the business, and, it certainly makes decision-making easier. With investors, that it will take some practice. It will take some presentation practice. It's sort of all on your shoulders, but I don't think you should at all let that hold you back from pitching your company. There have been plenty very successful startups that are just solo entrepreneurs, much like the Emma Yang story I told earlier. She's on her own with this and doing quite well. So it's definitely important to have, again, that team in place and the business plan in hand.
Thank you. The next question is actually quite interesting because that sometimes when you go on stage, you get this advice, and just imagine your audience as fruits or something else to make you less nervous. So the question is about when we do the pitching, should we be concerned with our audience facial reaction as we make eye contact? So for example, if you start noticing that people are not paying attention or sleeping, yawning, like what is your advice when it comes to that? Should we just look away and trying to become?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say, maintain focus on your own presentation. Try to black out that noise. Keep your energy up. If you're somebody who is by nature a little more relaxed, a little more sort of sleepy, try to amp yourself up. Listen to some music before you get on stage. Drink some coffee if you have to, but again, half caffeinated. When it comes to the audience, remember that a lot of these judges and people who are simply watching the pitches, they've been there all day. Some of them are really exhausted. It has nothing to do with what you're presenting. But a lot of these presentations are filmed for future use. So act as if they're not in the room and don't even think about the cameras. Just think about you in the moment. And if you've done, your prep in terms of your slides and you've rehearsed in front of a mirror or with a friend or with your co-founder, you'll knock it out of the park. I would say if I see somebody sleeping, I just move on. I don't even think about it.
That's good. So a question perhaps not directly related to pitching right at the instance, but when it comes to advisory board, what is your advice on acquiring them locally and overseas, plus through the engagement with investors?
In an effort to engage investors, is that the question? How to acquire a solid
require
board?
Yes.
Okay, great. I think when assembling a board, and again, this is not my wheelhouse necessarily, but certainly a number of the solvers we're working with are looking for advisors. Solve is constantly looking for advisors and challenge leadership group members. And we look at what we need wholesale. We take a step back and say, what kind of variety in terms of backgrounds and verticals do we need to make this dream team? Is it government experience? Is it expertise technically? Is it somebody who has a wide social network who can help us get the word out? So I think really getting clear on what your goals are before you even think about a wish list is important. For a board, obviously, you want a variety of skills. You want somebody with marketing skills, somebody who has HR background, financial, all of the kind of key roles that a board would comprise at a Fortune 500 company. But in the case of, again, the water startup or the mental health startup, a great deal of this will be quite niche. So you'll have the benefit of doing that quick cold call or email. And frankly, no one calls each other anymore. So getting that call out of the blue still does hold weight. And I think laying on the flattery, laying on the, would you be my mentor? We always say at Solve, ask and you shall receive. And, I know it sounds cheesy, but you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So you might as well reach for the stars, and you'd be amazed what happens.
That's great. Do you have any tips or tactics when it comes to, engage your investors and have them invested in your business, but as a business owner, you still want to remain the control and not, you have to satisfy your investor while not having given them the power to make decisions that might not lead to a positive influence of your business?
Right. And this goes back to the idea that, you don't want to be too greedy with your equity. If this is your first startup, it really would benefit you and your entire company to get that funding if you feel comfortable with the funder. However, drawing very sort of tight boundaries around which areas are you kind of deem sacred. What are key features of your business that you are not willing to change? And being very clear about that. When it comes to the financial piece, really understanding your revenue and monthly expenses, whether it's fixed or things that are variable, will allow you to understand sort of how much funding you need per month, and will allow you to get very, very specific about the type of funding you need and where you're willing to sort of be a little more flexible with your mission or day-to-day activities. But I think it's important for any entrepreneur to get crystal clear about those things that you will simply not budge on, and to be a little bit stubborn about that, because the essence of your company is really tied up in that original passionate idea. And it's important for the founder to hold those values, near and dear. So if you're clear on your financials and you're clear on things that are sort of non-negotiables, as we'd call them, the rest can become a lot more clear in terms of what you're willing to allow your investors to infringe on.
Okay, thank you. So you also covered a bit on the elements for doing a pitch, like what should be in a pitch deck, for example, and how do we allocate the time for each key areas? Like what should we focus more, for example?
That's a great question. I think it depends on the background of the company, whether it's nonprofit, for-profit, what type of funding you're looking for, what vertical you're from. If I were to personally answer this question, I would say addressing the sort of market opportunity and why your product is suited to really solve that issue in the market. That's the most critical, sort of your theory of change, as we say in the social impact space. Once you start there, if you can really create that thesis, it's much easier to build everything out from there. It's easier to build out stories and all of the other kind of steps that we talked about, the solution and why you're uniquely positioned to solve it. But if you're starting out, you really have to address those first pitching basics. State the problem and the market opportunity.
That's great. I have two questions, but I think they're actually quite related to each other. So what are the metrics that investors usually use when they listen to a pitch from a startup? Because they're trying to come up with a plan in terms of what is the best way to raise initial funding, and perhaps what our investors are looking at when it comes to their current financial status, if they are currently self-funded, for example.
Sure. I mean, I think the easiest way to think about it is kind of the lifetime value of your company, how much money you're going to make divided by customer acquisition costs. That's sort of the easiest to understand way of how an investor is going to approach this. Investors want to know that you're going to get cash flow break even, that your expenses and revenues are going to be lined up. So if you can project, and again, this is future looking, what's your revenue growth in the future? Revenue projections are usually overly bullish, I would say, which means they're usually way higher than reality might suggest. Investors might not rely on that as much. That doesn't mean you don't need them. So a business plan and team in place, as I've said, those are really the critical pieces. But if I were to point to one financial piece, it's lifetime value divided by customer acquisition costs.
That's good. The next question is, should we invest time to talk to people that are not necessarily experts in the industry of our business? And I guess this relates to a little bit related to the design thinking. Who do you interview? Do you interview the experts? Do you interview like the two extremes? So what would be your position on this before someone does the official pitch for the preparation?
Honestly, at Solve, we really do celebrate design thinking as far as, talent and ingenuity are everywhere. And the idea that somebody who might not be in your particular area of focus could have such invaluable feedback, which is why I would say, do your business pitch presentation in front of somebody who has next to no background on it. We always say, explain your solution to a 7-year-old. A 7-year-old needs to understand exactly what you're saying. Whenever we write sort of an external facing opinion piece or article, we tried to keep at that sort of 7-year-old reading level. And I know it sounds kind of silly, but if you can break it down in such basic terms, anyone can understand it. And so in order to do that, I mean, obviously in some cases, like the question about sourcing technical expertise or perhaps advisors for your board, you'll need to kick it up a few notches. But when we're talking about your business pitch and how, you're particularly suited to address this problem and how you're going to do that, keep it quite simple. Therefore, you do not need to just focus on people in your industry and your background.
And thank you for that. And that leads to the next question, really. So if you have identified this non-expert, what would be your suggestions in terms of this initial approach? Because you don't want to come on as in, what are you talking to me, for example? Are there any ways that what are the first lines we should talk about before they actually start practicing their pitch or selling their products to see their reaction?
So in terms of kind of cold calling people who are out of your industry, is that the question?
Yeah.
Okay. I would really start with, upfront exactly what you're trying to achieve and why you're trying to reach out to this person. People are shockingly generous with their time. I think the important thing is to not inundate them with information. So keep your email to 3 or 4 sentences max. This should be something that along the lines of a company boilerplate in terms of length. What expertise could they provide? Why you admire their work or their insight? And stick to the items that we discussed at the top of the call. what's the market opportunity and what your company's trying to do. If you can do that in 4 sentences and specifically offer some times to connect with them, make it easy. Don't ask them what times work for their calendar. Offer times that work for yours. People are lazy, but they are generous. So, make it as easy as possible for them to connect with you. And there's some free technologies out there, including Calendly and other sort of scheduling tools that just make it super easy to collaborate with others on the fly.
I have here, from your experience, just, in general, what makes a pitch great? Like, from what you have heard, and what is an absolute disaster from what you have heard?
Oh, that's a good one. What makes a pitch great absolutely is capturing people's hearts and minds. You don't want to be overly business focused, even with the funders. You want to focus on the aspirational pieces. You want to focus on what's going to inspire people and make them feel like your solution is truly going to change the world. Be bold and rely on visuals. I can cite a couple of examples. And in fact, I would really, really strongly recommend that you all go to MIT Solve's YouTube page. We have an entire section where people pitch their solutions. All of the winning selected solver teams excuse me, have done their 3-minute pitch. And you can see some of the really inspiring stories that led us to select these solvers out of 1,200 applications, more than 1,000 applications. So, in this case, it is people who really tell that story, who go beyond just the scope of, whether it's artificial intelligence driven technology that, help someone access a mental health professional, or whether it is more of a tangible product like a menstrual pad for women in India who might otherwise miss school or work without this product. And I'm talking about Solvi, actually, which is a terrific solver. They captured our hearts and our minds because we really looked at this solution in a way that could be transformative and could move the needle. So if you're passionate and that shows on stage, you're really going to capture the room, and you're not going to see those people napping in their chairs like somebody asked about earlier. On the flip side, I would say some of the worst presentations are ones where people kind of zoom through their slides, don't really think about that two-way conversation, and get overly bogged down in technical or financial details. There's really not too much that you need to provide in the pitch. Keep it to the elevator pitch. Absolutely, in your business deck, you need to have financials, the 220 rule that we discussed. But try to focus more on the transformative opportunity when you're giving your pitch.
That's great. Thank you so much, Andrea. I think that's the end of all the questions.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. That was an excellent presentation and really great Q&A. I think all the attendees got so much great information. So I want to thank you again for attending and being our expert and sharing your knowledge. And also for all the attendees, thank you for attending. I hope you got all your questions answered and you're going to be giving some great pitches in the future. So thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it. And the webinar, we are going to close the webinar at this point. Thank you so much, Grace. Thanks so much, Andrea.
Thank you, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.